In 1914, war was fought on land and at sea, not in the sky. Aircraft were fragile machines, mocked as useless and unreliable. Most nations ignored them completely. Britain didn't. While the world debated whether aircraft even mattered, Britain asked a radical question. What if air power fought alone, not as support, but as a force that could decide wars? That idea was ridiculed, called dangerous, unrealistic. But when the first real tests came, bombs, cities, speed, survival, Britain already had something no one else did: the world's first independent air force. The Royal Air Force wasn't born from confidence, it was born from necessity, and its early victories shocked the world. If you want to know how Britain changed warfare forever, subscribe now, because this is the story of a gamble that rewrote military history. Before Britain ever shocked the world with air power, it first had to believe in something almost everyone else dismissed. In the years leading up to the First World War, aircraft were not symbols of dominance. They were experiments, fragile frames of wood and fabric, powered by unreliable engines, flown by men who accepted that survival was never guaranteed. Most military leaders saw them as tools for observation at best, flying binoculars that might spot enemy movements before returning home, if they returned at all. Britain initially thought the same way. At the outbreak of war in 1914, British aircraft were divided between the Army and the Navy. The Royal Flying Corps served ground commanders, while the Royal Naval Air Service protected fleets and coastlines. There was no unified vision, no single doctrine, and no belief that the sky itself could decide wars. Air power was subordinate, borrowed, and often misunderstood. But the war changed faster than anyone expected. Trenches stretched across Europe, swallowing armies whole. Battleships remained powerful, yet slow and limited by geography. Meanwhile, aircraft began to do more than observe. They guided artillery, disrupted enemy movement, and increasingly attacked targets far beyond the front lines. For the first time, war could reach behind defenses, into supply routes, factories, and cities. Britain noticed something critical before most others did. Aircraft ignored the old rules of warfare. They were not bound by trenches or coastlines. They crossed borders in minutes. They forced defenders to react rather than prepare. And most importantly, they demanded speed of decision that traditional command structures struggled to match. Decisions that took hours on the ground had to be made in seconds in the air. This created a problem no one had planned for. Army generals wanted aircraft focused solely on supporting troops. Naval commanders wanted control over anything that flew near the sea. Both believed air power belonged to them. But aircraft were becoming too important, too fast, and too complex to remain divided. By 1917, Britain faced a stark reality. German air raids were striking British cities, civilian morale was shaken, defenses were disorganized, responsibility was blurred, and no single authority truly controlled Britain's response in the air. The solution Britain chose was unprecedented. Instead of strengthening existing branches, Britain did something radical. It removed air power from both the Army and the Navy entirely. In 1918, Britain created the Royal Air Force, the world's first independent air force. This decision was not universally celebrated. Many senior officers believed it was reckless. Some argued it weakened the Army and Navy. Others claimed air power was still immature to stand alone. Britain was betting national security on an idea no one had proven. But the gamble was deliberate. Britain understood that modern war was no longer about holding ground alone. It was about control, of time, of space, and of decision-making. An independent air force could think differently, plan faster, and act without waiting for permission from ground or sea commanders who were fighting a different kind of war. The Royal Air Force was not created because Britain was winning. It was created because Britain could not afford to be slow anymore. And very soon, that decision would face its first real test.
An idea, no matter how bold, means nothing without proof. For Britain's new Air Force, that proof arrived almost immediately and under pressure. By 1917, the war had reached British cities. German bombers crossed the Channel with growing confidence, striking London and coastal towns in daylight. Factories burned, civilians were killed. More damaging than the destruction itself was the message. Britain's defenses were fragmented, slow, and reactive. Army units guarded the ground, naval forces watched the sea, but no one truly owned the sky. The creation of an independent air force was meant to fix exactly this problem. For the first time, air defense was centralized. Fighters, early warning systems, searchlights, and anti-aircraft guns were coordinated under a single command structure. Information flowed faster, decisions were cleaner. Instead of reacting locally, Britain could now respond nationally. And it worked. Intercepts became more frequent. German formations that once flew unchallenged were now forced to fight their way in and their way out. Bombing accuracy dropped, losses increased. Raids that once felt inevitable began to look costly and uncertain. The shift was not dramatic or cinematic. There was no single moment of triumph, but the pattern was undeniable. Air power, when controlled as its own domain, could defend a nation. This was the Royal Air Force's first real victory, not a battle captured in headlines, but a strategic success that proved independence mattered. Britain had not invented flight, it had not built the best aircraft overnight. What it had done was remove delay, confusion, and divided authority from the air war. Other nations noticed. Observers from allied and rival powers studied Britain's system closely. Reports circulated, doctrines were questioned. Slowly, the assumption that air power must always serve land or sea began to crack. Britain had demonstrated something uncomfortable but clear. The sky rewarded those who treated it seriously. The most important lesson was not technological, it was human. Air combat compressed time. Pilots made decisions in seconds. Commanders had to think ahead rather than react behind. An independent air force allowed planning that matched the speed of flight itself. It reduced hesitation, it empowered initiative, and it accepted a reality others resisted. Modern war would not wait for consensus. By the time the war ended, Britain had done more than survive the air threat. It had changed how nations thought about warfare. The Royal Air Force stood as proof that control of the sky was not a supporting act, but a decisive one. That legacy would echo far beyond 1918. In the decades that followed, air forces around the world would be built on the same foundation Britain had laid under fire: centralized command, independent doctrine, and trust in human judgment as much as machines. Future conflicts would magnify these ideas, but the shock came first, quietly, imperfectly, and decisively, over British skies. Britain's greatest air power achievement was not dominance, it was understanding. Understanding that wars would no longer be won only by holding ground or ruling seas, but by mastering the space above them first.